The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with the low rumble of multiple species in conversation. Towering over most delegates, the Kr'Thok representatives flexed their armored exoskeletons, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among their kind. Nearby, the sinuous forms of the Slith moved with liquid grace, their scales shifting through iridescent patterns that served as both communication and warning of their venomous nature. At the highest tier of the chamber, the Qualor delegation sat in meditative silence, the air around them shimmering with psychic energy that subtly influenced the emotional tenor of the gathering. These were the acknowledged powers of the galaxy, species that had evolved as apex predators on their respective worlds. The Kr'Thok, with their unmatched physical strength and natural armor capable of withstanding small arms fire. The Slith, whose speed allowed them to strike 5 times before most species could react once, delivering neurotoxins that could kill in seconds. The Qualor, whose psychic abilities let them dominate the minds of lesser species without lifting a finger. Together with a handful of other predator species, they controlled the most resource-rich sectors, the primary trade routes, and held permanent positions on the Galactic Council's inner circle. Lesser species existed to serve, trade, or simply stay out of the way. This was the natural order, reinforced by millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of galactic civilization. Physical dominance translated directly to political and economic power. It was simply the way of things, which made the arrival of humans all the more unremarkable. The first human delegation to the Galactic Council drew stares, but not of fear or respect, rather of curiosity, amusement, and in some cases, predatory assessment. These bipeds were small compared to most council species, standing barely chest-high to a Kr'Thok. They possessed no natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, no psychic abilities. Their teeth were almost laughably blunt. Their skin looked soft and puncturable. Their muscles, while well-defined, were clearly no match for even adolescent Kr'Thok. Herbivores, whispered a Slith diplomat to his companion, tongue flicking out to taste the pheromones in the air. No, omnivores, came the correction, but not impressive either way. The humans' petition for recognition and trade agreements received perfunctory attention. Their homeworld was classified as a death world by galactic standards. High gravity, extreme climate variations, diverse biosphere with numerous pathogens. Yet they themselves seemed unexceptional products of such a harsh environment. Their technology was adequate but not innovative. Their ships were functional but unimpressive. We look forward to mutually beneficial relationships with all species of the Galactic Council, the human representative had said. We come in peace, seeking friendship and commerce. Several predator species translators had difficulty with the concept of friendship, a word that had no direct equivalent in their languages of dominance hierarchies and territorial claims. The human petition was granted with minimal debate. Another unremarkable species to fill the ranks of the galactic working class. The Kr'Thok, in particular, found humans entertaining. During early trade negotiations, the massive predators would deliberately loom over human representatives, baring teeth and emitting subsonic growls that triggered instinctual fear responses in most prey species. The humans showed discomfort but stood their ground. This amused the Kr'Thok enough that they offered slightly better terms than they might have otherwise. They have spirit for food animals, War Admiral Krogash had commented. Perhaps they will provide sport someday, if they continue to develop. But as human presence expanded gradually throughout the galaxy, odd reports began filtering into predator intelligence services. A human mining colony on Tarsus 4 survived an encounter with the notoriously lethal crystal sandstorms that had wiped out previous attempts at settlement. A small human trading fleet successfully navigated the treacherous Corward Passage, a route that most species considered too unpredictable for regular use. 3 human diplomatic missions to hostile frontier worlds returned with favorable treaties despite being sent without military escorts. Most curious were occasional references in intercepted communications to something called Marines. Intelligence analysts initially classified this as some form of ceremonial guard or basic planetary defense force. Images showed humans in slightly different clothing with no obvious enhancements or special weapons technology. The matter was deemed of little importance. Then came the Slith incident, a routine piracy operation targeting a human transport ship in the Outer Rim went suddenly, catastrophically wrong. Only 2 Slith raiders returned from what should have been a simple boarding action against an unarmed vessel. Their reports were fragmented, speaking of organized resistance from the crew, of humans moving with unexpected coordination, of ambushes in the ship's corridors. They were waiting, hissed the raid leader to his superior. They knew exactly how he would come aboard, exactly how he would move. They had traps prepared, not technology, simple physical traps. And when we adapted, they adapted faster. They called themselves Marines. The Slith High Command dismissed the report as the excuses of incompetent raiders. The transport had simply gotten lucky, they concluded. The word Marine was noted and filed away, but raised no alarms. It should have. War Admiral Krogash of the KR-Thok hegemony studied the holographic display of Praxis Prime with satisfaction. The human colony world sat at a strategic junction overlooking the rich asteroid fields of the Perseus Arm. Those resources rightfully belonged to the hegemony, and the planet would make an excellent forward base for further expansion. The fact that weak humans had established themselves there first was a minor inconvenience at most. The annexation force is ready, War Admiral, reported Fleet Commander Drezkar. 3 battle cruisers, 2 carrier vessels with ground troops, and support ships. The human colony has approximately 20,000 settlers and minimal orbital defenses. Intelligence suggests they have a small security force, but nothing that could be classified as military. Krogash clicked his battle mandibles in approval. Have they responded to our claim of territorial sovereignty? They have, War Admiral. They reject our claim and cite their prior development of the colony. They request negotiations. The massive KR-Thok leader rose to his full height, nearly 14 feet of armored, predatory power. Typical herbivore diplomacy. They will negotiate once we are in orbit and they understand the hopelessness of resistance. Proceed with the operation. The hegemony fleet departed, its course and purpose no secret. The humans had observation posts that would detect their approach. Fear would do most of the work before the ships ever arrived, Krogash believed. It was the way of things. The strong took, the weak submitted. 3 days later, as the hegemony fleet entered the Praxis system, they received a transmission from the colony. The human governor's image appeared on the command ship's communication screen. Hegemony fleet, this is your final warning. Praxis Prime is a sovereign human territory. Withdraw immediately or face military response. The command deck erupted in the hissing, clicking sounds of KR-Thok laughter. The human looked tiny on the screen, soft-skinned and fragile. Your courage is noted, Drezkar responded, mandibles spread in the KR-Thok equivalent of a condescending smile. Surrender your colony, and your people will be permitted to evacuate with personal possessions. Resistance will result in less favorable terms. The human's expression didn't change. Hegemony, fleet acknowledged. Stand by for Marine intervention. The transmission ended. Marine intervention? Drezkar turned to his intelligence officer. Explain. A security force designation, Commander. Nothing of concern. Our intelligence indicates no significant human military presence in this sector. 6 hours later, long-range sensors detected 5 human vessels approaching at high speed. Compared to the hegemony fleet, they were almost laughably small, the largest barely a quarter the size of a KR-Thok battlecruiser. They're sending their entire defensive fleet, Drezkar observed with amusement. Brave, but futile. Prepare to engage when they enter weapons range. But the human ships didn't engage as expected. They maintained their high velocity, streaking past the outer perimeter of the hegemony formation. As they passed, they launched dozens of small objects, too small to register as significant threats on the KR-Thok targeting systems. Some form of missile? Questioned the tactical officer. Too small for effective warheads, dismissed Dreskar. Focus on the ships themselves. That was the KR Thok's first mistake. The small objects were insertion pods, each containing 6 Marines. They impacted across the hull of the Hegemony command ship and 2 primary battle cruisers. Within moments, armored figures were cutting their way through hull access points, maintenance hatches, and sensor arrays. Boarding parties? Dreskar was incredulous. They're attempting to board us? Alert internal security. But the Marines weren't following conventional boarding protocols. They didn't attempt to secure beachheads or strategic positions. They moved through the vessels like infiltrating viruses, using maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and utility corridors that the massive KR Thok crew could barely access. The internal security teams found themselves fighting shadows. A squad would receive reports of humans in one section, arrive to find nothing but disabled systems, then be attacked from behind or above. The Marines utilized sound dampening technology, portable optical camouflage, and an intimate understanding of KR Thok ship design that should have been classified information. On the command deck, Dreskar was receiving increasingly frantic reports. Engine room reports critical systems compromised. Weapons control has lost targeting capability. Internal communications are being jammed by deck. Security Team 6 is not responding. The commander turned to his war admiral, mandibles tight against his face in the KR Thok expression of alarm. How are they doing this? They're just humans. Before Krogash could respond, the lights on the command deck flickered. A moment later, the main doors sealed shut with an ominous hiss. The environmental controls surged, flooding the compartment with atmosphere calibrated to human preference, slightly oxygen-rich and cool by KR Thok standards. From a ceiling access panel dropped 6 figures in dark combat armor. They moved with precision that belied their smaller size, deploying to strategic positions around the command deck before the KR Thok officers could properly react. Their weapons, surprisingly conventional projectile and energy designs, were trained unwaveringly on vital points of KR Thok anatomy. One figure stepped forward, helmet visor polarizing to transparent to reveal a human female face. The name Vasquez was stenciled across her armor. War Admiral Krogash, this vessel is now under United Marine Corps control. Your fleet is similarly compromised. Ground forces attempting to land have been neutralized. You are being offered one opportunity to withdraw from Praxis space with your personnel intact. Krogash, 14 feet of evolved predatory perfection, armed with natural weapons that could tear through metal and genetic memory of thousands of successful hunts, found himself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation as he stared at the small human with the unwavering weapon, fear. Meanwhile, on the surface of Praxis Prime, the situation for the KR Thok ground forces that had managed to land before the fleet was compromised was deteriorating rapidly. Drakmor, ground force commander, had expected minimal resistance. His troops, 800 elite warriors, had secured the colony's small spaceport and were advancing toward the administrative center when everything went wrong. The wide boulevards of the human settlement had suddenly become killing grounds. Precision fire from concealed positions forced his units to seek cover. When they adapted by moving through buildings instead, they encountered prepared traps. Not high technology, but devastatingly effective hardened polymer nets that entangled KR Thok limbs, adhesive compounds that gummed up breathing apparatuses, and localized sonic emitters tuned precisely to KR Thok auditory sensitivity. Most disturbing was the psychological warfare. The humans somehow gained access to KR Thok communication frequencies, broadcasting the sounds of wounded warriors or contradictory commands that sowed confusion. They used the KR Thok's own hunting instincts against them, presenting tantalizing targets that led pursuers into prepared ambushes. They're not fighting like prey, Drakmor reported to the fleet before communications were cut off entirely. They're fighting like predators who've studied us for years. By the time the main hegemony fleet was compromised, 60% of the ground force had been neutralized, not killed, but captured or incapacitated with a clinical efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than outright slaughter. 72 hours after entering the Praxis system, the Kaarthok hegemony fleet limped away in humiliating defeat. The human authorities had permitted them to recover their incapacitated ground forces and repair critical life support systems. The terms were generous in a way that stung Kaarthok pride more than harsh punitive measures might have. In his private quarters, War Admiral Krogash reviewed the damage reports with growing unease. The humans could have destroyed his ships once they had control of vital systems. Instead, they had neutralized threats with minimal casualties on either side. The precision spoke of confidence, of a species that didn't need to prove its lethality. How did they know our ships so well? He demanded of his intelligence officer. How did they exploit weaknesses we didn't know existed? It appears, War Admiral, that what we classified as Marines is not a ceremonial guard or basic security force, the intelligence officer admitted. Based on recovered communications and prisoner debriefings, Marines are a specialized warfare branch with extensive training in asymmetric combat, infiltration, and adaptive tactics. They train specifically to defeat physically superior opponents. Krogash's mandibles clicked in agitation. They anticipated us. This was not desperate resistance. This was a prepared response. He stared at the officer. Find out everything about these Marines. Everything. Word of the Kaarthok defeat spread quickly through Predator circles. Initial reports were met with disbelief, then concern. If humans could defeat the hegemony's military might, previous assessments of the species clearly required revision. The Qualor ascendancy, in particular, took keen interest. The psychically gifted species had observed humanity from a distance, finding their minds noisy and chaotic, but ultimately dismissible. Now, Senior Thought Director Varix convened an emergency session of the Ascendancy's military command. The Kaarthok failure is instructive. Varix's words echoed directly into the minds of the assembled Qualor leaders. They relied on physical dominance against an opponent that clearly specializes in defeating exactly such advantages. Our approach must be more sophisticated. The Qualor had built their interstellar power on psychic capability, the ability to induce emotional states, red surface thoughts, and in concentrated numbers, even control the actions of non-protected species. No physical armor could defend against their mental assaults. Our analysis suggests these Marines must possess some form of psychic dampening technology, offered Tactical Thought Commander Lazuli. This would explain their unusual resistance to fear response and their coordinated actions against the Kaarthok. I propose a direct test of this theory. Varix's mind voice resonated with approval. Proceed. Intelligence reports indicated a small human convoy would be passing through the Veil Nebula within the week, likely containing Marine detachments rotating back from Praxis Prime. The swirling gases and radiation of a nebula would provide perfect cover for an ambush, forcing the humans to rely on instrumentation rather than visual navigation. More importantly, the unique properties of the nebula would actually amplify psychic energies rather than dampening them. 7 Qualor vessels took position within the nebula's densest regions, generating minimal energy signatures. They carried an unprecedented concentration of psychic adepts. Nearly 300 of the Ascendancy's most powerful minds prepared to unleash a coordinated mental assault that would overwhelm any known protection. The human convoy, 3 transport ships, and 2 escorts, entered the nebula on schedule. The Qualor allowed them to proceed to the center of the formation before activating their psychic disruptors, devices that created a field of psychic white noise to prevent targets from organizing an effective mental defense. Commence the subjugation, Varix ordered. 300 Qualor minds reached out in perfect harmony, expecting to encounter confusion, followed by terror, followed by paralysis, followed by complete submission. It was a pattern that had worked on dozens of species across hundreds of encounters. What they found instead was difficulty. The human minds were not protected by technology as expected. Instead, they encountered mental disciplines unlike anything in Qualor experience. Where they pushed, the human minds bent but did not break. Where they induced fear, the humans acknowledged the emotion but continued functioning. Where they attempted to implant instructions, they met structured thought patterns that recognized and rejected the intrusion. They are trained against psychic assault. Lazuli's mind voice carried unprecedented uncertainty. How is this possible? Before the Qualor could recalibrate their approach, proximity alarms blared across their vessels. The human ships, rather than being disabled by the psychic attack, were launching small craft, the same insertion pods used at Praxis Prime. Impossible. Varix's psychic projection carried shock that rippled through the command network. Intensify the assault. They cannot resist our combined will. But the Marines were already boarding. As they breached the Qualor vessels, the psychic adepts discovered a new horror. The boarders were not just resistant to psychic influence. They were actively disruptive to it. Their minds projected chaotic emotional patterns, calculated randomness that made targeting specific individuals nearly impossible. Some appeared to consciously cycle through emotional states, shifting from calm to rage to clinical detachment in unpredictable patterns. More disturbing still, they carried devices that emitted precisely modulated sonic and light patterns designed to break Qualor concentration. A Qualor's psychic power required mental focus, something exceptionally difficult to maintain while processing sensory input specifically calibrated to disrupt thought patterns. Within hours, 3 Qualor ships were completely under Marine control. The others managed to retreat, many of their psychic adepts suffering from severe mental strain equivalent to physical exhaustion. On the captured command vessel, Captain Maxwell Rivera of the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit stood before the containment field holding Thought Commander Lazuli. The Qualor's normally luminescent skin was dull with exhaustion, its 4 eyes unfocused. How? The Qualor pushed the thought directly into Rivera's mind. How do you resist? Rivera smiled slightly. We call it mental resilience training. Been part of Marine preparation for centuries, originally designed to help troops function under extreme stress and fear. When we encountered your species, we simply adapted it to include psychic defense. He stepped closer to the containment field. You see, Commander, the interesting thing about the human mind is its adaptability. Once we understand a threat, we train for it. We inoculate ourselves through exposure. Every Marine in my unit has experienced psychic assault in controlled conditions hundreds of times during training. The Qualor's mental voice was faint now. Such training would be excruciating. Yes, Rivera acknowledged simply. It is. News of the Qualor defeat sent shockwaves through the predator species. If human Marines could resist even psychic dominance, what exactly were they facing? An unprecedented coalition formed in secret. Representatives from the KR-Thok hegemony, the Qualor ascendancy, the Slith brood, and 3 other predator species. They established a joint analysis task force with a single purpose: understand the true nature of the human Marine threat. The task force operated from a secure facility in neutral space. It gathered all available data, battle reports, prisoner interrogations, open-source human historical records, covertly obtained training materials, biological and psychological studies. Gradually, a picture emerged that was more disturbing than any of the predator species had anticipated. Dr. S.S. Vec, the Slith xenobiologist, presented the first findings. Humans evolved not as apex predators, but as persistence hunters, he explained, displaying comparative anatomical charts. They lack overwhelming physical attributes because their evolutionary strategy was different. They pursued prey to exhaustion, outlasting rather than overpowering. This required physical endurance, thermal regulation through sweating, and most importantly, neurological rewards for persisting through difficulty. Humans are literally neurochemically programmed to continue when other species would stop. The military historian, a KR-Thok named Grelmar, continued the briefing. Their recorded history is essentially continuous warfare. For thousands of years, they fought primarily themselves, resulting in constant refinement of tactics, strategy, and military organization. They developed concepts like total war, and force multiplication millennia before achieving spaceflight. Most disturbingly, their history includes multiple instances of technologically or numerically inferior forces defeating seemingly superior opponents through adaptation, asymmetric tactics, and sheer determination. The Qualor psychic specialist Tenematid, their divisional military structure is unique. While most species develop warrior castes or universal military service, humans created specialized branches with distinct cultures and capabilities. The Marines appear to be designed specifically for rapid deployment, adaptability, and function in hostile environments. Their training deliberately induces stress beyond normal tolerance to create individuals capable of functioning in conditions that would incapacitate most species. Over weeks of analysis, the task force compiled a comprehensive assessment of Marine training, capabilities, and psychology. The findings were distributed to Predator leadership in a secured report that quickly became the most read document in galactic military circles. The report detailed how Marine training utilized stress inoculation, exposing recruits to carefully calibrated physical, psychological, and emotional pressure until they developed the ability to function effectively under conditions that would break most beings. It outlined their problem-solving methodology, which emphasized adaptation, improvisation, and overcoming limitations rather than relying on inherent strengths. Most unsettling was the section on Marine Corps culture. The concept of absolute unit loyalty, mission prioritization, and the willing acceptance of self-sacrifice, if required. They are not superior physically, the report concluded. They are purpose-built psychological weapons, products of humanity's violent evolutionary and cultural history. They train specifically to identify and exploit weaknesses in opponents who rely on natural advantages rather than develop skills. They are designed to defeat precisely the types of species that dominate. The Galactic Council. As this knowledge spread through Predator military and political circles, a curious phenomenon began to emerge. Individuals who had direct or even indirect exposure to Marines in combat situations developed involuntary physiological responses to the mere mention of the word. Kearthok mandibles would tighten in stress posture. Slit scales would momentarily lose color. Qualor would experience brief psychic static. Dr. Vrinek, chief medical officer of the Kearthok hegemony, documented the response in a confidential medical brief. The physiological reaction appears to be a conditional fear response. Subjects who have encountered Marines or even reviewed detailed combat records exhibit pupil dilation, increased hormone production, and activation of threat response neural pathways when exposed to the word. This reaction bypasses conscious control. In evolutionary terms, it resembles the instinctive fear responses our ancestors developed to natural predators on our homeworld. The implications were staggering. The galaxy's self-identified predator species were developing a hardwired fear response to a word associated with physically unremarkable beings. Within 2 galactic standard years, the power dynamics of the Council had subtly but unmistakably shifted. Human diplomatic envoys were received with new deference. Trade agreements increasingly favored human interests. Territorial disputes involving human colonies mysteriously resolved without escalation. In one notable council session, a Kearthok representative was aggressively pushing for mining rights in a contested system claimed by 3 species, including humanity. The human ambassador, after listening patiently to 30 minutes of Kearthok posturing, simply stated, "Perhaps we should consult with the Marine Expeditionary Planning Division before proceeding further." The Kearthok immediately moderated their position and suggested a compromise favorable to human interests. No Marines were present or even in the same star system. The mere suggestion of their involvement was sufficient. The term transcended its military meaning, becoming something approaching a galactic bogeyman. Corporate security firms prominently advertised their Marine-trained consultants, often charging premium rates for the psychological impact rather than any special services provided. Some merchant vessels began discreetly painting small Marine Corps emblems on their hulls, despite having no actual affiliation, finding that it deterred piracy more effectively than weapon systems. The effects manifested in countless, everyday interactions. In a trade hub on the Galactic Rim, a Kr'Thok merchant named Thragkor was negotiating with a human supplier. When a human mentioned casually that their security chief had served in the Marines, Thragkor immediately accepted terms he had been aggressively disputing moments before. Later, a fellow Kr'Thok asked why he had conceded so quickly. "It's simply good business," Thragkor insisted, mandibles clicking nervously. "Nothing to do with their security personnel." A Slith hunting pack detected an unescorted human transport ship near a known piracy corridor. As they moved to intercept, their sensors identified the vessel's transponder code, UMC 88734. The letters UMC, United Marine Corps, caused the Slith pack leader to immediately abort the intercept. When questioned by his subordinates, he claimed the vessel didn't have cargo worth our time. None of them acknowledged the slight tremor in his scales. In an educational facility on the Qualor homeworld, a young student was watching a historical documentary about galactic politics. When the narrator mentioned Marine peacekeeping forces, the student experienced a momentary psychic disturbance that rippled through the classroom. The instructor quickly changed the program, citing its developmental inappropriateness rather than addressing the collective reaction. Perhaps most telling was the emergence of a black market for Marine Corps memorabilia. Predator species began collecting items associated with the Marines, insignia, training manuals, even uniform pieces, in a complex mixture of fear response and fascination. Possession of such items conferred a certain status, like ancient cultures that collected totems of feared natural forces to symbolically control them. Fleet Admiral Krenvark, veteran of the Kr'Thok military and survivor of the Praxis Prime incident, sat alone in his private chambers aboard the Hegemony command station. On his desk lay a small object, a Marine Corps Challenge coin recovered from Praxis. His clawed hand hovered over it, not quite touching. Krenvark had commanded mighty fleets. He had faced enemy armadas and planet-based defense systems. He had personally killed in combat and earned the highest honors of his species. Yet this small metal disc bearing the image of an anchor, globe, and eagle triggered an unconscious physiological response he could not control. The Admiral had begun collecting information about Marines years ago after witnessing their capabilities firsthand. He had studied their history, their training, their ethos. What he found had fundamentally altered his understanding of what made a species truly dangerous. The Kr'Thok had evolved as apex predators, relying on natural strength, armor, and instinct. For millions of years, this had been enough. Even as they developed technology and civilization, their fundamental approach remained unchanged: overwhelm with superior force, rely on innate advantages. Humans, and specifically Marines, represented something altogether different. They had acknowledged their physical limitations and systematically trained to overcome them. They analyzed opponents, identified weaknesses, and developed specific countermeasures. They functioned as coordinated units that magnified their effectiveness exponentially. Most disturbingly, they operated with a psychological framework that turned determination itself into a weapon. The galaxy misunderstood the concept of predator, Krenvark murmured to himself. "We thought it was about natural weapons, about evolved advantages. We were wrong." He finally picked up the coin, feeling the irrational acceleration of his pulse as his claws touched the Marine Corps emblem. "The most dangerous predator," he continued in the empty room, "isn't the one born with the sharpest claws. It's the one that sees its own limitations as problems to be solved through sheer, relentless will." Krenvark placed the coin carefully back on his desk, noting with scientific detachment the involuntary tremor in his hand as he did so. Somewhere deep in his evolved brain, ancient warning systems were firing. The same systems that would have alerted his ancestors to the presence of a superior hunter on their prehistoric homeworld. "Marines," he said aloud, and observed with resigned fascination as his body responded with a surge of primal fear to nothing more than a word in an empty room.